Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
Women weightlifters are set to compete with a transgender athlete in the Olympics. But her admission to an Olympic women's sport is drawing a lot of attention from female athletes and organizations, saying it isn't just. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story.
Weightlifter Laurel Hubbard has broken records in New Zealand and taken home multiple gold medals. The New Zealand Olympic team is sending Hubbard, a male-to-female transgender athlete, to compete with women. Hubbard says he's grateful and humbled by the support and kindness given by New Zealanders. Their Prime Minister says Hubbard followed the Olympic rules to participate.
We followed the rules, and that's the case for Laurel, but also the team in New Zealand. They have followed the rules.
But many athletes and women have a problem with these rules for obvious reasons.
Honestly, I think we've seen this day coming, but for the purpose and the future of women's sports, I think it's devastating news. I think it's making a mockery of what women's sports has always been and should always be.
Doreen Denny is Vice President of Government Relations for Concerned Women for America, a women's organization that says it protects and promotes biblical values and constitutional principles through prayer, education, and advocacy.
You're saying this is making a mockery of the sport. Could you go into that a little more?
Well, you know, we're talking about competition. We're talking about competition with athletes that should be on a fair playing field from the standpoint of their biological sex. I mean, that's why we've had male and female competitions in the past. For some competitions, we don't have male and female categories, and for those competitions, that's a different question. But in this case, we're talking about female athletes being forced to compete on an uneven playing field with a person that is identifying as a woman, but is not, in fact, a biological woman.
Hubbard met the Olympics requirement of keeping his testosterone below a certain level, but that bar is at least 5 times more than a biological woman's levels. Denny says the problem isn't the athlete who's trying to follow the rules. Rather, it's the rules themselves that need to be re-examined. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
You may have heard that police departments are struggling with manpower after the pandemic hit and anti-police activism surged. We take a look at the situation in the top 3 departments in the country. NTD's Christina Kim with what you need to know.
New York City has the largest police agency in the country, and the department spokesperson tells the Epoch Times they're down about 1,500 officers. Retirements jumped from 1,500 in 2019 to 2,600 in 2020. That's as New York State outlawed officers from using a knee on a suspect's back or chest as a restraint tactic. Officers and experts criticize the move, saying it will actually make things more dangerous. The Chicago Police Department is also struggling. Data from the department shows it lost around 700 officers since 2019. But they're also struggling to recruit new officers. In 2019, they hired 459 officers. In 2020, they only hired 157. The police union president told the Epoch Times the main sources of tension are a lack of respect for the force, salary disputes, and excessive workload. The president of the Chicago Police Sergeants Association says the force is short of 100 sergeants. On top of that, they're asked to supervise as many as 25 to 35 officers and work long hours with no days off. Moving over to the West Coast, Los Angeles had nearly 600 officers leave since 2019. That's largely due to a government hiring freeze during the pandemic and the city's decision to cut the budget by $150 million amid calls to defund the police. This, as the city saw a near 40% increase in shootings from 2019 to 2020. And as of June 12th, shootings are up nearly 60% from this time last year. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Dr. Fauci's organization oversaw funds given to the University of Pittsburgh. But some argue that may have granted experiments using lab rats and tissue from aborted fetuses. We take a look at some of the potential connections.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the NIAID, recently came under fire for granting federal funds for research that reportedly involves aborted fetuses. According to Town Hall, Fauci's office gave the University of Pittsburgh $61 million of the $109 million they received from the NIH for research. The research included attaching the scalps of aborted fetuses onto the backs of lab rats and mice. It was to study the human immune response to skin infections. The resulting study was published in September of last year. David Daleiden, pro-life activist and founder of the Center for Medical Progress, published an opinion piece in Newsweek detailing the potential conflict of interest between the University of Pittsburgh and Planned Parenthood Western Pennsylvania, or PPWP. That's because federal law requires that fetal researchers must be separated from the abortion process. If these allegations are true, that relationship would be against the law. He testified at Pennsylvania's House Health Committee's hearing on fetal experimentation earlier in May. In particular, the medical director at PPWP also runs the abortion training program at Pitt and is a vice chair on the Human Research Protection Office, which oversees research applications. In undercover videos taken by Daleiden, Planned Parenthood staff appear to reveal that they supply the university's tissue bank from the abortions they perform. The university has denied the accusations. They say there is no procurement relationship for tissue with Planned Parenthood. In an emailed statement to NTD, a university spokesman said the institution fully complies with federal and state regulations on fetal tissue research, and they say Daleiden's claims are not based in reality. They did not comment on their potential relationship with Planned Parenthood. Daleiden points out that most of this information is available from public sources. He urges the public and officials to take action against what he says is the human trafficking and the experimental use of aborted infants. This comes as the Biden administration recently reversed the Trump-era restrictions on fetal tissue research. And in May, the Senate narrowly rejected an amendment that would criminalize research that created chimeras, or human-animal hybrids. It proposed to bar the transfer of a human embryo to a non-human womb and vice versa. It was intended as a check on the NIH, which was planning to lift its moratorium on research using chimeras. The vote is part of a growing debate about the use of fetal tissue in scientific research.
After the death of George Floyd last year, many began protesting in cities across the U.S., with some protests escalating into looting or worse. NTD's Arian Pazdar has an update on the charges made against rioters in New York City.
Slowly but surely, 34th Street is getting busy again. People are walking on the street and shopping at stores. But a year ago, Macy's flagship store was just one of many completely boarded up for protection against vandalism and looting. Now it's time to prosecute those charges, but many have been dropped. More than 450 people have been arrested in Manhattan in connection to looting and riots from last year. But Manhattan's district attorney tells NBC they had to drop over 200 of those charges because of the backlog of cases caused by the pandemic. Attorney and former NYPD captain Robert Brown says looting should still be prosecuted.
These are generally felony cases. These are serious burglary cases that to drop. If you're going to, drop anything, drop your misdemeanors or your summonses.
Law professor Nora Demleitner says it's hard to prove that the suspects really committed the crimes, and says the suspects have already been punished.
Now, some of these didn't get jail time, but they got a fine, they got a criminal record. That's a substantial sanction for someone. We underestimate how substantial that is.
She added special circumstances like the virus played a big role in this decision.
This is not a binding decision on a future prosecutor, or if rioting started in New York tomorrow, the reaction would probably be quite different.
But according to Brown, this doesn't send the right message.
Go out and loot, knock yourself out. There's no ramifications to it. To the public, it gives you a sense of not being safe.
In total, almost 130 cases still remain open in Manhattan. Arian Pazdar, NTD News, New York.
A major Chinese state-owned media is now recruiting overseas internet personalities. It's part of a push to further Beijing's narratives in the West. The outlet is offering a $10,000 award to attract applicants. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Beijing is ramping up its overseas propaganda efforts. Chinese state-run media outlet CGTN recently finished a global campaign to recruit Chinese and Western social media celebrities, some of whom will likely promote Beijing's narrative. This comes after Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping announced that he wanted a more lovable image for China. CGTN is the English-language edition of the state-run broadcaster CCTV. Controversy surrounds the outlet. following accusations of televised forced confessions from the Uyghur ethnic group. In February, Britain revoked the media outlet's broadcasting license, meaning it can no longer air its content in the country. That's after UK media regulators labeled it as controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. CGTN's recruiting campaign documents ask applicants to submit a 3-minute video highlighting their talents. And to incentivize prospective talent, submitting the video comes with a chance to win $10,000 and a chance to become a CGTN employee. The station is also on the lookout for young broadcasters, reporters, and presenters. A columnist at the Epoch Times newspaper says CGTN is targeting internet celebrities because citizen journalism is becoming more popular.
Nowadays, self-made media is very developed, and traditional media has been greatly affected. These young people have self-made media outlets that are influential. This has caught the CCP's attention. They want to use these young people to promote narratives in a non-traditional media way.
CGTN is known to highlight internet personalities that echo Beijing's narratives, one of which is the YouTube channel Living in China. In one video on the channel, the host called genocide allegations in Xinjiang a fabricated lie pushed by Western media. And media outlets are taking notice of CGTN's campaign. UK newspaper The Times reports that at least 7 people from 2 British universities had signed up for the campaign. An expert on Chinese digital disinformation from Oxford Internet Institute told The Times that if we have Western social media influencers reading out China's official line on particular issues, then domestic audiences might believe the Chinese Communist Party is admired by international audiences. Don Ma, NTD News.
China has the second highest population of millionaires in the world, but many of them seem to have their sights set on other countries. A new report explains what's driving them to leave. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
China's wealthy are seeking greener pastures abroad. That's according to a recent Afrasia Bank report. Data shows that the country is among the world's top 10 for the largest outflow of millionaires, and now it ranks number 1. The report lists nations with the largest 2019 emigration rates for high net worth individuals, or HNWI. The study covers HNWI with net worth ranging from $1 million to $9.9 million, and who have settled in a new country for at least 6 months. 16,000 millionaires left China in 2019. That's more than twice India's reported rate, which comes in at number 2 on the list. Hong Kong ranks number 4 after Russia. More than 4,000 Hong Kongers chose to leave the politically charged city. Given the city's population of just 7.5 million, the shift reflects an extremely high emigration rate. Reasons for leaving include financial concerns, work opportunities, and opposition toward regional politics. As for the countries receiving these millionaire immigrants, Australia tops the list. The nation accepted 12,000 new HNWI in 2019. The United States trailed behind slightly with nearly 11,000 HNWI. International media report that many rich Chinese citizens are running away from the country's polluted cities and the Chinese Communist Party suppression. The trend reflects a 2014 report from Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post, saying a Barclays Wealth report found that around half of China's rich intended to move to another country within 5 years.
A group of Coca-Cola shareholders are threatening legal action over the company's diversity policy. They say the policy might actually be illegal and would require contracted law firms to violate anti-discrimination laws. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
Back in January, Coca-Cola required its outside law firms to use diverse attorneys for its legal work or risk losing pay and business. The soda company demanded that at least 30% of paid legal work be done by people of color, LGBTQ people, women, and people with disabilities. Half of that quota must be black attorneys. But a group of concerned Coca-Cola shareholders are saying that these policies actually violate anti-discrimination laws and thus expose the company to liability, meaning the company could get sued.
There are any number of individuals discriminated against who could challenge such a thing. Any or all of those entities could bring suit against Coca-Cola, arguing that Coke had most clearly violated a provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That was actually the very first civil rights statute passed by Congress. That's what they're violating. The very first civil rights statute.
Dan Mornoff is the executive director of the American Civil Rights Project. The public interest firm sent a letter to Coca-Cola earlier this month on behalf of the shareholders. One of their demands is that the company must publicly retract and scrap the policy. Mornoff says if Coke doesn't comply, they will have to take legal action.
I do certainly hope that Coca-Cola's officers and directors do what they should and bring the company back into compliance with American law, as well as with the consensus of a supermajority of Americans about what is right, and stops discriminating on the basis of race, ethnicity, sex, gender, and disability status. I hope that they do that. I hope that we don't have to bring courts into this in order to force them to do what they must know they should do. And if they don't, well, then we'll make them.
A spokesperson for Coca-Cola said the diversity policy is being reviewed following the April resignation of Coke's top lawyer who came up with it. It's unclear if the policy is still being enforced upon law firms. Coca-Cola told NTD in an email that the company has nothing additional to share about the policy. Several major corporations across the country are adopting similar policies to Coke's and are implementing different forms of diversity quotas. Mornoff says this letter to Coca-Cola also serves as a warning to other corporations. He says if this matter ends up in court, the ruling could not only impact Coke, but also the other companies embracing these policies. Grace Coulter, NTD News.